Throughout history, it seems that those who are in power have tried to write their own truths. And here are a couple of examples. I know that the words back in the pandemic are bad words. None of us want to think back on that. That being said, though, back during those times, in the United Kingdom, the Prime Minister of that time, his name was Boris Johnson, had imposed very, very strict gathering restrictions on the people of the United Kingdom. Much stricter than we had in any of the most restrictive states in the United States. But in spite of that, in the midst of the pandemic, while his gathering restrictions were enforced, he held a large gathering Christmas celebration for his supporters. Now that bit of two-sidedness is bad enough. But on an even darker, more serious note, I can distinctly remember over 3 years ago, Russian President Vladimir Putin insisting early in February that his country was not going to go to war with Ukraine. And to this day, if memory serves, he continues to insist that it is not a war that his forces are engaged in, but a special military operation. And our own politicians, well, let's just say if you have taken a moment to listen to both sides of them, something becomes very apparent and very obvious very quickly. And that is that somebody is obviously lying because the mutually exclusive truths that both sides insist on cannot possibly all be true in the same universe. It's not possible. So somebody's lying. I'm not going to get into the who. I'll go this far as to say, I think probably both sides do, to some degree. I won't go any further than that, though. That would exceed my bounds. But I think I do have the freedom to at least go that far. Unfortunately, this and other examples of truth distortions and outright lies has resulted in a form of relativism that causes people today to question whether truth in an immutable and consistent form actually exists. There is a very common trend in our culture today to equate truth with perception. If I say it is raining, and you say that it is not raining, one of two things must be happening. Either one of us is lying, or we are not observing the same weather in the same location. We live in a world today that is truth-starved. There seems to be an innate part of the human psyche that wants there to be absolute truth in our world. But our leaders, our culture, quantum physics, if you're familiar with the analogy of Schrodinger's cat, I won't chase that one, but it's kind of a fun one if you've ever read about it. And even our spiritual institutions seem to be working at odds with this deep-seated desire, and to the point that, yes, truth itself is a broken signpost. To the point that we are left with two options. One is either absolute truth as we know it doesn't exist, or two, we're looking for it in the wrong place. I didn't read this passage, but Pontius Pilate, while interviewing Jesus, Jesus says, I came to declare the truth. And I almost imagine Pilate chuckling as he says this. He says, what is truth? Because for Pontius Pilate, the idea of absolute truth, independent of the Roman Empire's head of state, the emperor, seemed ludicrous. For Tiberius Caesar, he dictated what would be true and what wasn't. And anyone who tried to speak to the contrary, well, the Roman military was very good at dealing with people like that. But in the face of that power, the power of the sword, Jesus declares a different truth that does not hinge on the whims of earthly rulers. And it is that claim that has made world powers afraid of the message, the good news of Christianity from the beginning. Because the message of Jesus, the truth that he came to proclaim, was that a different sort of kingdom was coming. And it was one that did not rule with brute force. It was one that embodied the true and absolute justice. It was one that embodied love overcoming sin, life overcoming death, and a new creation, bringing life to the old. That idea of out with the old and in with the new terrifies those who obtain power and authority through the world system of the threat of death and punishment. Because if a new kingdom is coming, if a new kingdom that will do away with the powers of death and sin, if a kingdom like that is coming, bringing heaven and earth once again together again into a new creation, well, then that means that the current world order is on borrowed time. Earlier in the Gospel of John, Jesus is confronted by followers that apparently didn't really get where he was coming from. And when he calls on them, he refers to his truth as the truth that sets people free. When he calls them on it in their confusion, we ultimately see the people turn on Jesus, and he declares that rather than acting like Abraham's children, who were supposed to be working for and looking for the redemption of all creation, they were behaving like the children of the devil, the Satan. The Satan is a title, it means the accuser. And they were colluding with the lie of this age. Because Jesus said that the devil was a liar from the beginning and the father of all lies. And that lie looks something like this. It says nothing will ever change. Nothing really matters because everything fades away to never come back. And death wins. That's the lie. But thanks be to God, we have a truth to counter this lie. In the beginning, God looked at his creation and he called it good. His creation, his creating act was an act of love. In order to go outside of oneself to make is an act of love. Sending his son is an act of love. The raising of Lazarus is an act of love. The washing of the disciples' feet, Jesus' death and resurrection are all acts of love, pointing to the truth that life wins over death. Life is actually the stronger power. It is the real power. Love is the real power. When Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, He is saying that He is the way that God is going to save the world. He is the truth that reveals what the new creation is going to look like. And He is the source of all life. Later on that night, Jesus promises His followers that if He leaves, He will send another helper, an advocate, a spirit of truth to help us and to convict the world of, Jesus says, to convict the world of its sin, of God's righteousness, and of His judgment. And this message that sin is to be overcome with truth. That God's righteousness is what will save us. It is referred to theologically as imputed righteousness. Whenever we come before God, that means that when God looks at us, He sees Jesus' righteousness interposed on us. So the message is that sin is to be overcome with the truth of Jesus' love and His sacrifice. That God's righteousness through His Son Jesus is what saves us, and that the lies of this world stand to be judged as the ruler of this world, the father of all lies, is judged and condemned. This is the truth that we get to point to as Christians when the world questions if truth even exists. Our truth is of a God who loved the world so much that He gave His only Son to save it. But there is more. Because if we are filled with the Spirit of truth, we are charged to continue this message of truth that Jesus gave us. We are to be His messengers, His truth tellers to all the world, to everyone, including those in power. Our calling is to tell the world that another kingdom, another king is coming, and the powers of our age have no ability to stop it. And when we do, we will be required to tell truth to power. Now next week, we will kind of take a bit of a break in here in between and look at beauty as a broken signpost. But the following Sunday, we will look at power, our final signpost that needs righting. The truth of Jesus reveals a power so great that even death and hell itself could not defeat it. Will you go and tell that truth, that good news to a world that is so desperate and in need of that truth? That is our calling. Will you answer? Amen.
Amen.